Bob, you are a very special person to the Texas Rural Leadership Program. It was your vision for this program that gave it life. Could you share a little bit with us about what was your motivation to make something happen, to reach out to rural communities with a leadership program?
It's awfully hard to say where that concept began in my life, because I think maybe one of the blessings of my life was that I was born with a handicap. And for the first maybe 5, 6, 7 years of my life, life was pretty miserable. But when I was I guess I was in the 4th or 5th grade, I was living in Houston, and we had a interscholastic league meet, and I took a flyer and decided I wanted to be in extemporaneous speaking.
Very good.
And I picked that out because I never had any idea what extemporaneous even meant, but it was impressive. And I wanted all my classmates I knew I was doing something they didn't know anything about either. But anyway, the first year I bombed out completely. That was in the city of Houston. The second year I came in second. And that was enough for me to feel that if I could succeed in that, it didn't make any difference whether I had any handicaps and I couldn't catch a ball, I couldn't, my eyes kept me from being able to do things right. So from that point on, I've had that sense that there was nothing wrong with me, that I could take it. But ever since then, I've always been number 2, and I've never really been in a situation where I was the chairman of a group or president, because that isn't what I felt. That as I grew older, those kind of titles, they kind of reflect, they restrict you. You know, when you've been county judge, there's certain things you can't do.
Right.
But when you are the judge's assistant, you can do a lot in the background. They do it quietly and get things done. And that was, if I was going to be able to change people's lives, I had no interest in the title.
You were involved in some way once you came back with the Town and Country Church Conference?
I was involved with them, I guess, even when I was in Texas, when I first got out, I met Dave Busink, and that was my first contact with Texas A&M. So that when I came back to Texas and retired, and we were went back to Liberty, the city manager in Dayton invited me to come on board and work with him on economic development. And I was there that I had that opportunity to see Liberty had become, in the interim, when I first went there back in the 50s, and about 25 years later. When I first went there, the whole town was maybe all the businesses, the activities of the town were within, say, a 4-block radius of the town square. Mm-hmm. The courthouse and the grocery store and the men's shops, the jewelry shops, the banks, everything. And that's where the leadership was, too. In the interim, I came back, and that had about almost disappeared, and the big box stores had occurred. Mm-hmm. And they brought in, the old leadership had either been sold out or moved out or died, one or the other. They brought in new leaders from outside the rural community who didn't know the rural community. They came from big cities. And that concerned me, that their style of leadership may not be terribly convenient for the people living in small towns. So that was the first alarm I had with the long-term effect of the big box stores. And I knew that the local people could benefit if they had more background in training of how to be leaders. The people who were leaders when I first went there had inherited it from their fathers down, and it was kind of a part of the whole system in the small mm-hmm. community. But that had gone.
Been lost.
Been lost. And the idea of bringing leadership training into the community was, in a sense, a replication of what I had seen in Missouri, where the agent came out and lived in the community and brought all the skills to him.
Right.
Well, no, I remember one day you and Dave Rusink knocked on my door at A&M, and you knew I'd been working with the Family Community Leadership Program, and there was this question, Lynn, what can you do to help us get a rural leadership program together? Do you remember what we decided?
Nope. A long time ago, girl.
You remember that I looked at you and said, you're right, because I grew up in Quail, Texas, which is about as rural as you can get up in the Panhandle, but I knew that it was more than I could handle by myself. And so we talked about, for us to make your dream become a reality, we'd need to find out who else shared our vision and who else might work with us. And you left my office, and it wasn't very long before you called me back and said, Lynn, I've got all these agencies and organizations that are willing to work with us. You want to tell them a little bit about how you picked out people to talk to and how you got them to commit to working with you?
God, and I have to dig back into my memory bank for that. I know that the most logical group would be the, strangely enough, the rural electric system.
Exactly.
Because they were the only ones who had a sort of an investment in the community in terms of what they were doing, and it was to their advantage, in a sense, to see the communities grow strong. I targeted them, I think, much more so than anybody else, because that was the most logical group of all.
And you got them to take the lead role.
Yeah, and they bought it right away. Yeah, and they were enormously supportive. And I gradually picked up a few other groups that I really can't remember and identify.
Well, before you finished, there were 43 agencies and organizations.
Were there really?
Texas Department of Community Affairs, there was A&M Agri-Life Extension, called now Ag Extension, Prairie View Extension, the Texas Historical organization that runs all that. I can't remember all of them either, Bob. My memory goes away too. But I was so impressed by how you weren't worried about you being recognized, and you've just shared that. You weren't worried. You were the servant leader that just said, I want this to make this happen. And you did something neither David nor I could do, Dave Rusink nor I could do, by going out and just, as the person with the vision, keep sharing it until you put together that group. And that led to the coalition being formed, that all of the organizations said, none of us can do it alone. We all know we need it. We'll make a commitment to each other to work together to build the program and to support it. If the Farm Bureau says we need a program, the rest of us will show up in their community. If the electric co-op said we need a program in their community, we'd all show up.
Good, yeah.
And so that's how the program got started. Now, since that program began, for about 8 to 10 years, our program focused on teaching principles of leadership. And one of the unique things about the program was the class would have to take on a project where they applied those principles to work together as a team and discover that they could make something happen that they had no idea they could make happen. And as you shared about how communities had changed over time, one of the things we discovered in that first round of classes was there were a lot of people that had come into the communities with the schools, with the utilities, with the banks that had leadership potential, but they weren't recognized by the good old boys. And they weren't allowed to be in that leadership circle. So this gave a place for them to meld together. We even had some people participate in the classes that had grown up in the community, had gone away like you did to develop their professional career, and then they came back home to help take over the family business, but they weren't accepted by the good old boys because they abandoned them. They were looked at upon as people that abandoned. One of them was a young man whose father even owned the newspaper, and he had to work to reestablish himself as being part of that rural community. And this program gave him a chance to bond with other people in the community in a way he would not have had a chance to do. After that, we had a opportunity to change the program to work with community colleges by recreating the curriculum and calling it Critical Thinking Leadership Skills. And so we took off in a new direction. And then about 3 years ago, we decided that that wasn't where we needed to be today. And so we've recently revised that curriculum, and it is now called Leaders in Action. But it works on basic principles of looking at assets instead of problems in the community, and building on those assets for their future, and helping people develop those principles of leadership, but focusing on improving their communication skills so that they really listen to each other's stories and visions and work together.
This is a question I want to ask you because you've been hitting on it. But the importance of having the ministry and the churches involved in leadership as you move forward in communities. How important is that?
I think, Ronnie, it's important in the sense that in the last few years, I've sort of resisted the idea of leadership in terms of people's concept of the leader having to be a sort of the president or the man in charge, but it is the leader or that leadership group is that person or that group of people who help individuals or groups of people become what they want to become.
Yes.
Exactly.
So that changes that whole emphasis on what leadership is all about. I have only, I guess, one other illustration that talks about leadership about that, and this you can always cut this out in the end, maybe a little bit long, but I had been invited by the Episcopal Church as a result of my contacts with the JSAC, that was a Joint Strategy Action Committee, where I knew David Rusink. And matter of fact, when I was the administrator, this was the National Council of Churches, and we had a division on rural work. And several times I had invited Extension people to come to our meetings because I felt that the Extension people were doing the same kind of job we were. They just wore a different hat. Right. And I felt very much comfortable about their being with our group. Yeah. And I think that I'm still kind of struggling for some way of substituting that word leadership, because it still conjures up that idea of somebody riding ahead on a white horse, and a lot of people don't even know how to get on a horse. I wish there was a way of expressing what we're saying without getting using that model of the person out front pulling everybody along.
Well, we're sort of blending it into our current curriculum, the idea of being a facilitator, the person who helps people make things happen. But we still use the term leadership in packaging the program because that's what everybody's looking for. But once they get there and get involved, they realize it's not what they thought it would be.
And that's precisely what you talk about in terms of ministry. I mean, that's the whole function of ministry, of helping people come into a relationship with God that helps them change their lives. So I mean, the whole thing blends. So you could be at home wherever you are on Sunday and weekdays, doing one thing or the other. But it's precisely, and that was I always felt so comfortable in the environment of Extension, because I felt that comradeship in terms of a commonality of our goal. And even in Texas, where there are some pretty distinct differences between denominations, and I lived this in a small town, even there I felt it. I think that the things that...
There are common things that we have that we believe and hold true.
Yeah, and that make our decisions in any of those areas as viable or one area as the other. I think so.
Well, Bob, I appreciate your letting us come and visit with you today.
Thank you.
And I'm just so eternally grateful that you had the vision and the passion and the style of leadership that you had to open a door for many, many Texans to expand their vision of leadership, both now and for the future. I think our state's going to be a lot better off, and I know a lot of rural communities